The last 2 weeks we were looking at evidence from mostly the world of physics. We talked about how the laws of thermodynamics point to the existence of a God. We talked about how the laws of mathematics point to the existence of a God. Specifically, they don't allow for the infinite amount of time. They don't allow for the universe to have always been here. And then we were finishing up last week and we were talking about how come God was exempt from all of these things. And we talked about how specifically, like, if a engineer makes a machine, he's not bound to the machine is bound to him. And therefore, he can create all these rules, but he can still exist outside of it. And if the machine could think about some things, and it could wonder, like, well, when this lever is pushed to the right, I know these things happen, and these are all really complicated things. And if you could think about it that way, we're kind of the machine in this example, and we're trying to understand why the world is working the way it is. But we know, like, there had to have been something else that created the machine to begin with, because the machine is just so incredibly complicated and so precise that it just doesn't work any other way. And that's the reason that God gets to avoid all of these problems, is because he's not bound by his creation. He can exist outside of it. This week, there's more pictures for everyone. I'll try to keep it a little more simple. If you want to make a comment, if you could please raise your hand. There were some people who were having trouble hearing last week, and the people on the live stream, and when you get the microphone, I'll try and call on you at that point. George he's on the spot.
Lance, I'm going to go back to some old technologies, because really, in today's terminology, some things, definitions have changed. And those are definitions between the words science and technology. Science is something that is all right? Technology is the application of science. So you take some principles, just like the lever, and when you make a machine, you use some of the old science things and make them usable.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, God has made things as is, and we are just using technology that we are learning to apply what God's already done.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so this week, we are looking at evidence from astronomy. This will be the next 2 weeks. This is just fun. I just think this is awesome. Just everything drawn to scale. Because you don't see this in science textbooks very often. You see, like, the sun in the corner, you know, so the premise of this is the Earth special, or is this just some random space rock that we're happen to float upon? Okay? So the late atheist, Carl Sagan, said there's nothing unusual about Earth. He was an astronomer. It's an average, unassuming rock that's spinning mindlessly around an unremarkable star in the run-of-the-mill galaxy, a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. And he went on to expand that the forces of nature are so automatic that life is such to evolve to wherever water exists. So that was his perspective on it. And so this is the reason they're always looking for water everywhere they go in space. This is why, you know, when they find the frozen water on Mars, they're so excited, because they think if you have water, then you're going to just get life. They think, and, you know, maybe they find some bacteria on Mars, who knows? But we're gonna look at a lot of things today, and we're gonna see what if he was right or not. So the premise of today is, what if Earth isn't as ordinary as some scientists would have us believe? What instead, of Carl Sagan's view, we are unbelievably fortunate? Okay, real quick. everything in the universe, according to scientists, started out as hydrogen, okay? After the Big Bang, everything was super hot, and then everything formed into hydrogen. The hydrogen would coalesce and they would form stars, and then the stars would cook the heavier elements, is essentially what they're saying is happening. So a star forms, it starts fusion, it starts making heavier and heavier elements. At the end of its life, it explodes, and it shoots out all of those heavier elements into the universe, and then eventually, you do this a couple million times, and you'll get new sections of the galaxy that contain things other than just hydrogen. So if you kind of look at this one, so on the outside edge, you get hydrogen fusion, then you get helium, then you get carbon, then you get oxygen, and then it keeps fusing down into heavier and heavier elements the further you go into the star, the longer the star lives. And the bigger the star is, the more gravity that's in the middle of it, and it can fuse heavier and heavier elements, okay? So just as a background, that'll be important later. Okay. If you are out there in the universe and you are looking for a galaxy, let's say you work for NASA or you work for the SETI program or some scientific organization, you're trying to look through a telescope, you're trying to look through the new James Webb thing, you're trying to find a galaxy that can support life, okay? What are the best things that you need to look for? One of the main things you need to check out is there's a lot of things in space that will kill you. So every time one of these stars explodes and it goes into a supernova, it releases huge amounts of radiation and gamma rays. So, you know when you, so some people used to be scared about X-rays. They, back in the day, they used to give out huge doses of X-rays. Now they give out these like microdoses when you go get your arm X-rayed or something like that. And gamma rays are like the big bad daddy of X-rays. They will pierce through just about anything, and they can kill you in a very short time. When I was doing this for the teenagers, they were like, no, but gamma rays made the Hulk and all the superheroes. And I was like, no superheroes. Like, no superheroes, you're just dead, okay? The next thing that you want is you want to be pretty far away from those supernova explosions just from the shrapnel effect. You don't want your planet to be exposed to anything that's going to send huge hurtling rocks or any amounts of just huge amounts of energy through it, okay? Third thing you need a circular orbit or a nearly circular orbit because you want stability for your host planet. You need it both for the host star and you need it for the host planet. So the star that's going around the galaxy, it needs to be in a circular orbit. And then you also need enough heavy materials to create a functional planet, okay? So like you can't exist in you can look out there at the universe and you can look at all of these places, and if you find one, like the matter isn't distributed completely evenly. There's sections that are mostly gas, there's sections that are heavy with rocks and heavy elements, but you can't just if you look at just the light gaseous regions out there, you won't have enough heavy materials to create planets yet, okay? You won't have enough of those things that have exploded out of supernovas to get anything functional. All right. So, is that better? That's a little better. Okay. So this is the Milky Way galaxy. So the European Space Agency estimates there's 200 to 400 billion stars in our galaxy with, on average, an estimated 2 to 3 planets per star. So that gives us 600 billion planets that we've estimated. How many can support life? That's what we're going to look at today. 1? 5? Okay. I like your optimism. Okay. So step 1, you have to be part of a spiral galaxy to have a chance, okay? Luckily, 70% of all observed galaxies are in this spiral galaxy part. We are the one on the left, but we have a couple more arms than that. If you kind of look down at the bottom, we're closer to the ones that have spun around a couple times, okay? We are the barred spiral galaxy, okay? Within these galaxies, there's sections that work and there's sections that don't work, okay? But step 1 is these things at least spin. And if you have a galaxy that doesn't spin, it leads to all sorts of problems. So step 1, you have to be in a spiral galaxy to have any chance at all. But it's 70% chance, okay? Here is an example of one of the other kinds that you can get. So 15% of the galaxies are called elliptical, okay? What happens in this is because they don't spin super often, or it has a really low rotation rate of spinning, the planets and the stars move around like a bee swarm in there. Nothing forms a unique pattern. And so anything that's, if the stars are doing this, and they're doing all this, weird bee movement, a planet that's trying to hang on to one of these stars is going to do the exact same thing. If it gets close enough to another star, it can actually just peel the planet off, and it can go with the new star, it can crash into a star. Like, there's lots of issues with it. So it's impossible for our hypothetical planet in this case to have a stable orbit, okay? Here's the other problem. These are also really low mass galaxies, so these are mostly made up of the hydrogen, which is one of the problems we talked about at the beginning. So you don't have a lot of the heavier elements that you need to form planets in the first place. So, billions of stars out there, no stable orbits, and 0 planets. Okay? Here's the other option. You can be in what's called an irregular galaxy. It's neither spiral nor elliptical. This is the outer edges of the universe. This is where stars are forming at this point in time. Lots of newborn stars, lots of gas and dust, constantly being ripped apart and bombarded by a supernova, and then when that happens, you get all these gamma rays that go out. Remember, no superheroes, you just die. And then, same thing, there are no stable orbits, or very few, and there is no chance for life. All right, so step 1, you have to be in a spiral galaxy to have a chance. But you've got a 70% chance to do it. Okay. So this is our galaxy. This is the Milky Way. At the galactic center of the galaxy is a black hole, and it is surrounded by a mass of those globular clusters, which is the bee swarmy stars, okay? So did I put it on there? I got another picture. We exist, the sun's orbit. It's kind of a yellow line right there. That's the sun's orbit inside of the Milky Way. But if you just look at our own galaxy, and you look at the percentage of stars that exist in our galaxy, a huge chunk of them are in the middle, surrounding the black hole in the galactic bar. So if you're looking at, like the proportion of stars in the galaxy, you can see, like, I don't know how many is in there, but 50% or so are concentrated in the middle. And so at least half of the stars are not functional from the get-go. They're doing the bee swarm, There's no chance of anything forming in them. And, okay, let's go to the next one.
Hey, Lance, I just had a comment.
Yes, sir.
With all that scientific knowledge, it appears that more people should believe that there is a God and that he did create everything. It's not just by happenstance.
Yeah, it's just all happenstance, man. We just got super lucky. No, we didn't get super lucky? Okay. Yeah. That's the thing. Like, you have to make up your mind about what's reasonable. Is it reasonable when we look at the end of this that we got super lucky? And I'll show you how lucky it is. Or was there something else that just made it happen the way that it was supposed to? Let's move on. Yeah. And then if you happen to be on a planet near the center, you would also be exposed to the black hole. These are these weird things that supposedly not even light can escape from. They're incredibly dense gravitationally. They're like the cosmic anchor of our universe that everything spins around. When something they got some pictures of a star that was going next to a black hole, and what happened was the black hole started sucking off pieces of the star as it was rotating around it, and the gas from the star started going into this black hole, and it formed a ring around it as the star was rotating around it, and then the light would go in to this section, and when it crossed the section, then it was just black. So it was kind of cool to look at. But whenever something gets pulled into a black hole, huge amounts of energy are released, including these highly dangerous forms, the gamma rays, the X-rays, and all the particle radiation. So you can't be anywhere near the center of our universe and have a chance of surviving. Okay. Let's look at this. Does anybody know what type of star we have? A yellow dwarf? There's white dwarfs. There's not specifically yellow dwarfs. So if you look at this star class chart, the brightest and the biggest ones are on the left-hand side. Those are the O's, okay? And these things are just incredibly enormous. They're just really, really big, and they're incredibly bright. So if you look, let me zoom in, make this a little easier for you guys to see. Is that better? Yeah, that's a lot easier to read. Okay. So the O stars have a temperature of 40,000 Kelvin, and they have a radius of around 10 times what our sun does, but they have a mass because, like, if you fill up a sphere, the mass grows exponentially, whereas the radius doesn't grow nearly as fast. But they're relatively short-lived. They have a lifetime of about 10 million years, but they're also incredibly rare. If you look at the percentages, 0.00001. So there's not very many of those out there. Okay? As you move towards the other stars, you see that the stars become sorry, the K-stars are really hard to read. They become cooler, okay? So the temperature decreases the smaller the star gets, okay? The luminosity decreases, okay? So think about it as a light bulb. If you got a really, really big light bulb, it puts out a whole bunch of light. If you got a smaller light bulb, it doesn't put out as much light. Same type thing happens with stars, okay? You get a really, really big star, it puts out a lot of light, puts out a lot of energy. If you get a little smaller star, it can't do nearly as much. The fusion can only produce so much energy as it's shooting out there, okay? We have a G-class star, okay? Our star is down there in between the F and the K's, okay? It's the yellow one, all right? And it's estimated that our star has a lifetime of 10 million years. I'm sorry, 10 billion years, because those are in millions. So if you also look at it, as you're moving down the sequence from the really, really, really bright light bulbs down to the much, much dimmer ones, okay, the percentage and the abundance of these stars in the universe changes, okay? So there's very, very, very few O-type stars, okay? If you go to a B-class star, there's 0.1%, then you get 0.7, and then, man, I'm sorry, that is just impossible to read. If you go to ours is one of 3.5% of the stars out there are G-class stars. And then if you look at the K-class, there's 8% of the galaxy is made up of K-class stars. Same issue, it becomes less bright, it becomes cooler, but they live longer, okay? And then at the very end, you get the tiny red M-class stars, which are 80% of the stars out there, okay? So at the very end of this spectrum, you get these really, really, really dim stars, and they live an incredibly long life compared to what we do, or our star is expected to live. And then they don't produce nearly as much heat, they don't produce nearly as much light. And what was that other one? Yeah, and that's it. Okay, and then there are a tiny percentage of these other ones. So these are giant stars. So this is, the red giants is supposed to be the expected end of our star. When it goes through at the end of its life, what will happen is it will go from this size out to this size. It will expand quite a bit as it's running out of energy. Some of the forces inside the star will start to change, and it will rapidly expand in size. And then once that happens, it can either explode into a supernova, or it can become a white dwarf. It can collapse on itself. And then, yeah, these are, so if you get a giant star, if it's on the lower end of the star spectrum, if it's on the G, K, or M. If it's on the cooler side of the initial beginning star, you get a giant. If it's one of the bigger and brighter ones, you can get a supergiant, and then it'll either explode or it'll turn into a white dwarf. Okay? All right. Cool, Lance. Why do I care? I know you like this, Lance, but okay. So 88% of all the stars out there are smaller than ours, okay? And a very small, 2.5% are bigger than our stars, okay? And 3.5 are just the ones that we like with our sun, okay? What if we didn't show up and our Earth didn't form around a G-class star? What would happen? Does anybody have any guesses? We wouldn't be here. But why wouldn't we be here? Either burn up or not be warm enough. Absolutely. Those are definitely problems that you could encounter. All right. Yeah, so here's just another version of the same chart. Y'all want to read this one too? No? No? You're good? Okay. Just check it. Okay. Let's say we didn't form around a G-class star. Let's say we got one of the 88% of the stars out there that's slightly smaller and slightly cooler and slightly less bright than our stars. So we got one of the, we got a yellow star. we got one of the orange or red ones, okay? All right? If you happen to do that, you get most of your light in the red spectrum. So, are there any biologists or plant people in here? I'm not even calling it the right name. What happens if you try to grow plants and you use the wrong kind of, like if you're trying to grow plants inside, you know, say you live up in Alaska or something, and you're trying to grow plants with a light bulb that's just red light. What will happen? No photosynthesis. That's exactly right. So like all of our plants are very attuned and they want both kinds of light. They want blue light and they want red light. They want all the full spectrum to be nice and happy plants, okay? So that's the first problem. If you get an orange or a red class star, all of your photosynthesis is going to be much, much less efficient than you would be in that case, okay? So here's the bigger problem. So if this star isn't as big as the other one, and it's not as bright, you have to move closer to this host star in order not to freeze to death, okay? So if we're just playing, you know, if we're playing, you know, solar system God right now, and we're just acting like we can control things, and we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna get an orange or a red star, okay? And in order to make it work, we're going to take the planet and we're going to take it from where it currently is and we're going to move it a little closer so it doesn't freeze to death, okay? When you do that, when you get close enough not to freeze, you become what's called tidally locked to the planet, okay? Who notices when we look out at the moon, do we get to see all sides of the moon? Or do we get to see just one side of the moon? That's just one side, okay? The same face of the moon always faces the Earth, okay? It is tidally locked to the Earth, okay? So whenever it's up there, if my thumb is the side that we can see, it sits there and it just does like this the entire time, okay? It doesn't rotate around the Earth at all. We didn't get to see the backside of the moon until we sent satellites and spaceships up there and photographed it, okay? So when you become tidally locked, so this planet, we moved it closer so it didn't freeze to death. Now, this planet has another problem. The same side of the planet always faces the same side of the star, okay? And this is what you get if you have a tidally locked planet, okay? So in our own solar system, the two inner planets, Mercury and Venus, are mostly tidally locked to our own sun. So if you look on them, they do spin, but they have it's something like 3 days a year. 3 days, Mercury days, Venus days per Mercury or Venus year, okay? So they are still spinning around the sun, but they're spinning at such a low rate that they only have 3 days for every time that they circle our own star, okay? This is what you would get if you lived on a tidally locked planet where you happen to be in the exact spot that you needed to be, where you didn't freeze to death, okay? If they put you in the temperature range, they put you in the spot next to your star, you would have half of your planet that's burned, like literally boiling or over 100 degrees Celsius constantly, and the other half of your planet is frozen constantly. And then in the middle, you have something approaching normal-ish temperatures, but the problem there is, you know, on this picture, it's colored green, but that's probably wishy-washy thinking, to be quite honest, because when you have a huge temperature difference, what happens is the winds and the storms in those areas will be severe. So think like hurricane force winds or worse constantly in those sections. So it's painted green in the picture, but it's probably not. It's probably brown or white at this point. There's probably not an area where you could live on this section. Okay? All right. Okay. Let's go the other way. Let's say we didn't get the orange or the red one. We got a slightly brighter star. We got a slightly brighter light bulb, a slightly hotter one, but what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take the planet and we're going to have to move the planet out so it doesn't burn up immediately, okay? We're going to have to push the planet out so it survives, okay? Even when you do that, the problem here is a lot of the light that's emitted by these brighter stars are emitted in the higher form of the radio spectrum frequencies, okay? These are the X-rays, these are the gamma rays, these are all these really dangerous things that you don't want to be exposed to, okay? So if we move one star class higher, we get UV radiation that's between 2.7 to 7 times the amount that's received on Earth. Okay? We would get between 3 and 7 times the amount of UV exposure. So if you're going to the beach and you're having your nice, Florida vacation, checking out the ocean, the equivalent 2 hours of sun exposure you now take 45 minutes to give you the same sunburn on the short end. So if we got the 2.7 times amount of radiation, your 2-hour sunburn now takes 45 minutes to cook you. So you now have to put on sunscreen like every 30 minutes or so. Or if you got something that's on a little hotter, it would take just 17 minutes to get a 2-hour sunburn. So anything that you did outside would be pretty catastrophic in terms of the exposure that you're just taking just to live, okay? So what happens when you get sunburns? Cells die. You look like a lobster. People make... Yeah, you get cancer over time. So what happens to it, Miss Linda? How do you get the cancer?
The radiation disrupts your DNA.
Radiation disrupts your DNA. That's exactly right.
You lose the control. And so now the cell's malicious because it doesn't have an off switch.
Yep, exactly. All right. Okay. So step one, huge cancer increase, huge radiation increase. Step two, these higher forms of radiation, they carry more of a different kind of energy, and when they impact the ozone layer, what would happen to our planet is it would take the tops of our ozone layer and it would just strip it off. These radiation pieces will hit it and it will just split it and it will send it into the universe. So we are talking about living on this hypothetical planet, assuming that we still have the protection that we have right now with the ozone layer and the magnetic field and all of those things that we enjoy on Earth, okay? The likely effect of moving further out but getting a slightly hotter star is that it would destroy most of the protection that we enjoy on Earth. So all of these things would probably, at the initial stage, when you move the planet out and you still have an ozone layer, you still get some protection from this thing, you would still get, you'd get the, 45-minute to 17-minute sunburn. As the protection gets stripped away from our hypothetical planet, it actually probably gets much worse for us at that point, okay? All right. Yeah. So this is how energy flows. This is the radio frequency spectrum. So you have the really low impact forms, which are the radio waves, which we all know. And then you get the visible light and the infrared. And then if you just look at the energy transfer between what is visible light versus what is X-rays and gamma rays. The energy transfer on these things is enormous compared to what we are used to with visible light and all the other forms of energy. That's why, X-rays, that's why they do these microdosing of X-rays when you get something broken and they need to take a look at it. They just flash it on for a split second. And you get less than you would by flying in an airplane. You get nothing compared to what they used to. But they're just such high forms of energy density when they hit something. They can penetrate through a bunch of different things. And so the crazy thing about gamma rays is gamma rays can go through a lot more things than X-rays can. So there's not a lot of things out there that will stop gamma rays. You can do lead shielding, or you can do, a big chunk of. There's a hypothetical spaceship that I was, watching on YouTube, as all of you do, I know, and they were talking about how if you were going to send a spaceship from our planet to another one, and first of all, the first problem is even at max spaceship speed that we've developed right now, the closest star is 7,000 years away. So there's that problem. The second problem is once you approach anything that's a reasonable speed to get there, let's say we've developed a warp drive engine, and we can do the Star Wars and Star Trek stuff at that point. Once you get to a fifth the speed of light, everything that impacts your spaceship destroys it, including dust. So you can have a gamma ray will just go straight through your entire spaceship. A piece of dust this big will impact your spaceship and it'll explode it. There's all sorts of problems. Okay. And then real quick, the other. Okay, sorry. The other stars that we looked at, the big, really, really big ones, the ones that are at the end of their life out there, those make up 5.4% of the stars in the universe. Those are the red giants and the white dwarfs. The red giants are incredibly low mass, but very, very, very big. Okay? They think it's technically possible that there is a habitable zone around a red giant, although the brightness of the star has a special issue with it. And then if you got around a white dwarf, so those are the ones where the star has already gone through its mostly end-of-life cycle, and then it collapsed on itself, okay? Those things are 10 times as hot as our sun, and they emit a huge amount of radiation, so they don't provide any habitable zone. Okay, cool, Lance. 3.5% of our stars out there are actually plausible candidates for forming life, okay? You can't go to the 88% of the stars that are cooler out there, because if you do, you're gonna find a star that, in order not to freeze to death, you have to move so close to it that you become tidally locked to that star, okay? And then once you become tidally locked, it burns one half of it and freezes the other half, okay? George, you get a comment?
Earlier, I said 5 when you asked for how many signs of life there are, and you said I was optimistic.
Are you revising your estimate?
That was not my answer. My answer came from a Berkeley PhD about 15 years ago who spent her whole life looking for signs of life. And she came up with the 5. Their criteria, and you said water, their criteria was liquid.
Just liquid water?
No, liquid.
Just some liquid?
Clear, pour.
Any kind?
And she picked out, I've forgotten the none of the 5, there were 2 in our universe, galaxy system.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Mars, but she picked out either Saturn or Jupiter. And it was nitrogen
Yeah.
that can be liquid. Now, what do you have to do to nitrogen to make it a liquid?
Oh, you have to get it really cold.
That's what they freeze the skin.
Right, yeah, that's
when
what
they
you
wanna
get when you
kill
go to the dermatologist.
All right. All right. But there were 5 in all of that. And she spoke with authority. I think 5 chances in all of this, possibly being life, and you have disregarded what you just got through discussing. Temperature and radiation. They were just saying liquid. Those people have been looking for years using telescopes, radio telescopes. They have come up with a conclusion. The best way to determine if there is life, one of the best ways, is by radio signals, because anytime you get a spark, you get a signal.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been scanning the skies for years. You go around America, there are different places where they have these great big telescopes.
Right.
Not telescopes, but they're what? Yeah, observatory, that's what they call them. Things they are picking up radio signals. And they're looking for something that shows signs of a system.
Yep.
Because there's lots of static out there. And
Right,
they have to
right,
screen
right.
through that. They are still looking, Lance.
It's
They are
it's
still
been
looking. And those people are these scientists. Now, I said 5, that was 15 years ago. They may have 7 by now.
Right.
And they have no qualm about just changing it and say, well, we changed our mind, and they move on.
But George, there's 600 billion.
So I may be wrong again.
George, there's 600 billion planets out there. 600 billion. There's got to be like one of them, right? Yes, sir.
I think that all this information you've given us pretty well shows us that scientists don't know much. Now,
There's
you really think about it, a lot of this stuff can never be checked. Okay, they're talking about the life cycle of a star and stuff. None of them knew when it started, much less when it's going to end. So you can see how illogical a lot of the stuff they have is. They basically know the stars are there, there's different sizes and things like that. But, you know, this shows you that man really goes out there to try to prove that he's smarter than God. And it's amazing, you know, the stuff that they know and they see, but really and truly, basically no one could, just like him talking about her, you know, she spent her whole life looking for life. All she needed to do is go to Genesis 1:1.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how people can make things super complicated, but that's why that they're able to convince so many people of these things, because they say, oh, well, these people are educated, they know these things. Well, the people of Columbus' time were very educated too, and they said the earth was flat. I don't think they were right. So, you know, just because you're educated doesn't mean that, you know, we can't use some logic and look at some of these things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Yes, Miss Linda.
You know, I think sometimes we get afraid of science. I am a scientist.
Sure.
And in my efforts as a child to disprove the Bible with science, I came away knowing that the Bible was true. And it is, I see science as man's way of trying to explain what God did.
Mm-hmm.
When you say our son will reach an end of life, that's found in 2 Thessalonians.
Yeah.
2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 7. And it says, and to grant relief to you who are afflicted, as well as to us, when the Lord is revealed from heaven with his mighty angels in flaming fire, inflicting vengeance on those who do not know God. And there are other verses that talks about everything melting away in fervent heat.
Right.
Well, there's your son dying.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how those two things line up. So, it's described in the Bible that everything will pass away through this heat thing, and the end of the world, the end of the earth will be that way. And if you think about our star expanding and getting really big at the end of its life, it's anticipated that it will, if it won't swallow Earth, it'll get really close to it. And at that point, it'll be so hot it would burn up either way. So, long time from now, we got other problems in between now and then. So, okay. And we'll do more next week. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, all the comments.